My name is John Lobell. I teach architecture at Pratt Institute in Brooklyn, New York. I blog at creativitydiscourse.com, review movies from a mythological point of view at cinemadiscourse.com, and you can reach me at johnlobell@mac.com. Our lecture today is on Venice. So this is for a lecture for a Adriatic cruise, and we will be arriving in Venice tomorrow. So let's just develop a little bit of background. And this is one of the great creations of humankind, so very little we can say about it in a half hour, but let's just look at a few issues. First of all, Venice and the imagination. It's featured richly in many books and in literature. Shakespeare set Othello and the Merchant of Venice in Venice. Thomas Mann set Death in Venice in Venice. Ezra Pound, Venice inspired a lot of his poetry, and he's buried in the cemetery there. Venice features prominently in Henry James' Wings of a Dove, and is visited in Evelyn Waugh's Brideshead Revisited and Marcel Proust's In Search of Lost Time. And the writings of Marco Polo and Casanova are key to Venice. So very important in literature and in movies. So here are just 3 James Bond movies: From Russia with Love, Moonraker, and Casino Royale, all set in Venice. And Death in Venice, A Little Romance, The Italian Job, all set in Venice. The best movies for Venice scenery: Casanova in 2005 with Heath Ledger, one of his last movies, where he goes in and out of rooms and runs across rooftops, so that Venice is sort of a starring feature in the movie. David Lean's Summertime with Katharine Hepburn and Rossano Brazzi. She enters Venice by train and walks through it just as we do today, and eats in Piazza San Marco. So in coming to Venice, if you come in by train, watch the movie, and my wife and I made a point of going to, which doors did she go through coming out of the train station, built in the 1950s, and it's now very often how we enter Venice. You come through the doors and bam, there's Venice right there, just as you open the doors, as we see below. And then, of course, she goes off and has a drink in Piazza San Marco. So let's get the exact table she got. I don't know if we did, but pretty close. In 2 days, we'll look at Venice and the romantic imagination in movies, exuberance in Casanova, history in Dangerous Beauty, age and obsession in Death in Venice, a middle-aged fling in Summertime, and youth in A Little Romance. So these movies can be fun. Now, here's Venice, and let's see what it's about. It's in the northeast corner of Italy, in a lagoon. And so we see on the right this unique geographical feature of this lagoon and marshy islands, protected, making it a very important port, and it became a major sea power. So here's an image of the lagoon. Here we see the railroad coming to this cluster of islands. There's Murano, separate island. That's where they exiled the glassmakers because they kept setting the city on fire with their furnaces. Why did people end up living in this extremely difficult place, like you're building in a swamp? Well, it was founded by refugees from Lombardy invaders coming in the 5 to 700s AD, coming down from the north, and they pushed the local inhabitants first for refuge and then to permanently live off the mainland into this protected area. These inhabitants became good at dealing with the sea. They became wealthy through trading in salt, taking the salt water, putting it out in the sun, drying it, making salt, which they would then trade. And they became good at building in the marshes using piles. So, as we see here on the left, there can be literally tens of thousands of piles for a single large building, which are forced down into the swampy muck. And then above the piles is a layer of water, stone that's very good in water, and then above that the brick, which is not so good in water, so it should ideally stay above water level, which unfortunately today is no longer happening. Here's a typical Venice palazzo, and we see the piles, the stone, the brick, several floors. So when we're taking our gondola tours or just looking across the canals, you can see these layers of the water-resistant stone, and then above that begins the brick. And these plazas were residences and places of business both. And so the gondolas or freight gondolas would pull up and could pull right in, sometimes right inside, for the goods that they were trading in. City is made up of campi, a campo, or in plural campi, and this would be an island surrounded by canals and would typically have a church and an open square, a squello, which is a sort of a guild. Residences and businesses would be around the periphery so that they could be reached from the water. Venice became a major sea power, building galleys that were used for both trade and war. The sea was so important that one of the ceremonial duties of the Doge, or Duke of Venice, was to celebrate the symbolic marriage of Venice with the sea by casting a gold ring from the state barge into the Adriatic, with stating, "We marry you, O sea, in token of our true and perpetual possession." Venice didn't become a major sea power merely by accident or by its location, but constructed a vast arsenal covering 110 acres, making it ships. And not only made the ships, but it made all the accompanying material, the sails, the ropes, the riggings, the cannons, the gunpowder, etc. It was one of the earliest mass production facilities, so that while other European countries could make a ship in a period of several months, this arsenal could make a ship a day. So by 1450, they had over 3,000 ships in operation. They had their own forest supplying wood. They made both trading and war vessels, developed guns and cannons, and were involved in continuing ongoing technological research. Galileo was a consultant on ballistics and strength of materials. It's described by Dante, and when he took over the city, Napoleon destroyed the arsenal so that Venice would no longer be a threat. It had a moving assembly line where it would move ships along with skilled workers specialized in various tasks. This becomes the model for the assembly line into modern industry. These ships just poured out, were important in warfare. Here we are back in 1298. This heavily armed and decorated 12th century Venetian galley would have been used to fight for control of the Mediterranean sea lanes. The active mechanism on the bow, on the left, is a trebuchet, or counterweight catapult. You see it hurtling a barrel with the fuse going, a barrel of explosives. It has just thrown an explosive barrel. Superstructure castles held massive massed archers, but an excessive superstructure and too many archers might roll a round-bottom galley while turning. Overall size was important because a large vessel could carry more archers and troops for boarding enemy ships, but bigger ships are also less maneuverable and therefore more susceptible to flanking attacks. So it's basically a war culture. For all the richness, the arts, the culture, all that was founded on its wealth from trade, which was protected by its battleships. In 1204, the Venetians looted from Constantinople the horses of St. Mark's, which we can see from the square. Venice controlled the Adriatic and then down into the Eastern Mediterranean for its trade routes. But later, by the 1500s, the balance of power starts to shift, and the European powers that were on the Atlantic, think of Portugal, Spain, England, launched a totally different type of ship which could cross the Atlantic. So upper right we have Columbus's ship, and lower right we have Magellan's fleet in what's called the Age of Exploration, beginning 1492 with Columbus coming to the New World. We have Europe turning toward the Atlantic, and this is part of the beginning of the decline of the importance of Venice. Venice was a place of pleasure, a center of gambling, of prostitution, great courtesans, and so this is Veronica Franco, and in one of our other talks we'll talk about a movie about her and look at her biography. So she is a famous Venetian poet and courtesan who lived in the 1500s, important enough to be portrayed by Veronese and Tintoretto in these two portraits. Also a center of gambling. And Venice goes through a long period of decline as a trading and military power. And here we are a year before the fall to the French. Their sphere of influence has greatly decreased. And in 1714, the Turks defeated Venice in a series of battles in a long ongoing war. And in 1796, Napoleon entered Venice, declared an end to the Venetian Republic, and gave Venice to the Austrian Empire. But Venice remained a place of wealth, pleasure, culture, arts. Here's a Tiepolo. And today, Venice is center of tourism and culture. So, today we know Venice for its floods, Acqua Alta, high water, Venice flooding, every year between October and April. But there are also catastrophic floods. They come from a combination of high tides and directions of the wind. And the next catastrophic flood is predicted for 2030. In 1966, there was a great flood, incredibly destructive. And what happens is water comes up higher above these protective stones to the brick, and then it recedes. Well, anything below water level, of arts and etc., libraries, books, are going to be destroyed. But also, the water then leaves behind salt, and that salt then continues to attack the brick to this day. So there's a continual battle against this deterioration. Here we see a bell tower just leaning a little bit, so you don't want to stand on the certain sides of these bell towers. Now, in response to this flooding, the plan is to close off the entrances between the barrier at the time of a catastrophic flood. This is called Project Moses, and the idea is to have these huge steel structures on concrete bases that will be tilted up at the time of a flood. So the hope is that will work. Work began in 2003, and it's now scheduled to be completed in 2014. We'll see if in fact it is. Venice today is defined by tourism, 1.5 million Italians every year, and 8 million foreigners, for a total of 9,500,000 tourists every year. And walking around Venice, It's really great if you're part of one of the festivals, film festival or the Biennale, the arts festivals, architecture festivals. But if you're just coming as a tourist, is Venice just a theme park? Is it a is it a sophisticated Disney World? And that's something you might want to think about. The art, there's murals throughout the churches. There's the Peggy Guggenheim collection, their own museum. There'll be exhibits. A couple years ago, a major Klimt show. Venetian music. Vivaldi was a Venetian, a contemporary of Mozart. And on the right is the Phoenix Opera House. There's music today, so if you are there long enough, you might want to go to operatic or other music events. Venetian Glass, typically made, as I said, in Murano, where they got banished because the glass furnaces could occasionally set the city on fire. Lace, to this day, beautiful lace is made there. It was a center of printing and publishing. The Carnival, a time of lowered inhibitions. The Venice Biennale, which includes the Venice Film Festival, and the gondola ride. So last time I was going to Venice, just before leaving, I pick up the Wall Street Journal, and there's an article about getting gondola rowing lessons. So if you, there's a sheet in the back that has some information, and it has contacts for these organizations where you can get a gondola rowing lesson. And you might want to feed the pigeons. They'll land on your hand and eat out of your hand. It's a delight if you're an animal lover. Very quickly, a few comments on Venetian art and architecture. We have a whole talk on that coming up tomorrow. So, three most important painters: Titian, Tintoretto, and Veronese. And Titian is lived from, not sure, but around 1490 to 1576. And you see it sort of parallels Michelangelo's life. So you could say he's the Michelangelo of Venice, a titan of a figure. These three figures were great rivals, commenting on each other's works, competing for the same commissions. The story of the three of them were competing for a commission, and one of them snuck in and zipped out the whole mural. The others are bringing in their little canvases with sketches for what they're going to do, and he's already got the whole ceiling covered, snuck in overnight. It's a looser technique than we see in Florence and Rome, with rich coloring and richly sensuous. So here's a Venus and Mars, and a abduction of Europa, a Diana and the shower of gold, which is Zeus coming in to seduce or rape her, and a Venetian courtesan also played against a Venus by Titian. Tiepolo, allegory of the planets and continents, the typical Baroque painting. These others were high Renaissance, and now we're Baroque, where we get these views up into the ceiling of churning figures, looking up between everybody's legs at the ceiling. Sketches for these are in New York's Metropolitan Museum. And very importantly, Canaletto, who made painted views of Venice. And the architecture of Venice, again, we'll be talking about this tomorrow, but we have the whole succession of European styles, Gothic and Cadoro. But the Gothic is just the paste-on the facade. It's just the pointed arches and the decoration. It's not Gothic construction like we would see in a French cathedral with the flying buttresses, etc. And then Renaissance, same structure behind the wall, but now our surface is Renaissance instead of Gothic. And Byzantine in St. Mark's Basilica is Byzantine in style. So if you've seen the Hagia Sophia in Istanbul, the interior is going to be very similar because it's within that style. and whereas there's one dome in Hagia Sophia, there's a series of them in St. Mark's. And very importantly to us architects, Palladio, here's San Giorgio Maggiore, and again we'll talk about that tomorrow, but the way he plays these, he puts these Greek or Roman temple fronts on his church, one layered in front of the other, extremely rich mannerist play of forms. And then Baroque in the cathedrals, San Maria de Salute, built in celebration of the end of a plague. So, smile and be happy. You are in Venice, or at least tomorrow. Thank you.